If you have ever wanted to understand how humans behave and how humans think and what we want and what motivates us, then you need to read some certain books about human behavior. And some books are better than other books because some books are scientific and some books are unscientific. So some books will be good and valid books written on research and a good foundation, and the other books will just be bad psychology books like self-help books or books with a certain political agenda. So this will be a video on the books that are the foundation of the science. So they will give you the understanding of human mind and how we really work. Because for these authors, it doesn't really matter how humans work or what we think, they just want to discover what's really going on. So I'm trying to avoid all books with any kind of bias whatsoever. So you always need to be critical, but good psychology is as good as any science. I think a good thing to keep in mind is the different level of books and academics texts that you can find on various subjects. So, for example, when you study psychology and you start off, you probably need to start off with some kind of foundation and some kind of basic literature that will explain how it all works and what the foundations are. Then you can understand the rest. And of course, if you want to understand statistics and stuff like that, then you need to read a foundation book on statistics. But either way, no matter what you want to study in psychology, I think it's good to keep in mind how hard the book is because some are so advanced and have so much neuroscience in them or statistics that they will be hard to understand for any kind of people. So try to look at the level of the different books and then see what kind of books you think are for you. And this is the first book I recommend for you as someone who wants to understand psychology and how the human brain works. So this is Richard Dawkins with The Selfish Gene. It's in my top 3 favorite books of all time, and I read a lot of books, especially on psychology. So this is not a book on psychology, and Richard Dawkins is not really a psychologist, and he doesn't really understand the human brain, but he does understand genes, and he was the guy who made the concept of the selfish gene popular. And the selfish gene is not a theory about a selfish gene as such. It's something different entirely. It's just the title that's called the selfish gene. So read it and understand what genes are, how genes work, and how they reproduce. Because if you understand that, you will understand human beings as mechanisms and as organisms that live and reproduce and kill each other and mate and stuff like that. Eat, are afraid, are hiding away, are attacking. All this is created by selfish genes. So you really need this as a basis for everything else. And it's a really great book. Now here is the number two book I will recommend you to read to understand psychology. And this is another foundation book. So it's not really about psychology as such. You won't get any social psychology or stuff like that from this book. But it's really good, and it ties together the concept of genes and animals and then psychology. So how can you use the concept of genetics and biology to understand how human beings and the brain and our behavior patterns work. So this is a really important book, but it is on a bit higher level than The Selfish Gene. I don't think it's as long as The Selfish Gene, but it has some concepts in this book are a bit hard to understand. The language is easy and stuff like that, but if you're really a beginner and if you're only in high school, then maybe only read some of the chapters from this book. Now, this is a really good book. Robert Wright is such a fantastic writer. He's not really a psychologist, but he has read about a lot of psychology, and he has a deep understanding of the science and how it all fits together in a pattern. He's really holistic in his thinking, so he tries to create a big picture from everything. And this is such a fantastic book about psychology. So it's a really great foundation because he starts off with the history and comparative psychology and yeah, a lot of topics. It's a must read for everyone. Even if you hate psychology, it's a must read for you. So yeah, I'll recommend this book because it's easy to get into, and it's the writing is really good, and it doesn't like present study after study after study, so it's not tiresome. But it will give you the foundation. It will give you the understanding of the full picture of how psychology works and how the science began and why it's not that old actually as a subject because before Darwin we didn't have any kind of foundation for studying human behavior. Nothing. It was just either God created it or He didn't. So there were no foundation for to explain why we got angry or why we got sad or why we got jealous and stuff like that. And now again, three of my favorite books in the whole wide world. Again, this is not really psychology as such, and there's only one of these guys who actually understands psychology at all, and that's Napoleon Chagnon. Elizabeth Marshall Thomas and Colin M. Turnbull, they don't understand any kind of psychology, they don't understand any kind of biology, they're just studying human beings. So these two books, The Old Way and Forest People, I wouldn't really call them academic books because it doesn't feel like academic books, it feels like regular people describing what they have seen. And you can kind of feel that they don't have any kind of theoretical or academic foundation to really describe what they see. But it's still really wonderful because, of course, they see what they see and they describe what they see, but they don't have any kind of foundation to illustrate what they're talking about. While Napoleon Chagnon is Chagnon or whatever his name is, he's a brilliant scientist. He has the foundation. He has a lot of great science in his book and in his articles too. And this is such a great book. Yeah, it's a must read for any kind of high school or school student overall. So it's about the tribes and how violent they are. And bands are before tribes. So bands are about 20-25 people in the group, and tribes, as in Chagnon's book Yanomamo, are about 200 or 150 people in the group. So it's totally different living conditions. While forest people is about pygmies. So it's little small people living in the forest. So three different books, but wonderful books for every kind of age and every kind of people. So read these books to really understand how we used to live and how we used to live in a natural way. So without houses, without smartphones, without computers, where our brain evolved and how was it created, in what kind of environment. In these books, they will answer that. But you still need to be critical. Especially The Old Way has some iffy foundations. But yeah, read it and then try to be critical. With Chagnon, Yanomamo, you don't have to be as critical. And now again, okay, now my list it's kind of irritating because we're still not reading about psychology. This is still not psychology. This is again an introduction to psychology, how to think straight about psychology. But I must say this is a really wonderful book. It's written by Stanovich, and I have also read some of his other books. And he has a really keen brain and a keen understanding into psychology. He's really a front runner in this aspect. He really can see things that other people can't see, And this How to Think Straight About Psychology is a book in the 10th edition. This is the 10th edition. So he has improved it year after year after year after year. It's a perfect version of a book. This is how you write a book. And this will illustrate how to think straight about psychology. So how to understand psychology and how not to understand psychology. I think this is like a foundation for the science. So when you read articles about psychology in the newspaper, I'd say about 90-95% of them will be some kind of weird presentation of psychology, and a lot of these articles will be total bullshit or just plain wrong. An introduction is the important part of psychology, to understand how the science works and how it doesn't work. And now, this might be my favorite book ever. I'm pretty sure it is. I've read it several times, and I will read it again, definitely. David Boss is always writing new versions of it. I must say, this is really hard science, as hard science can get. It's still a really interesting read, and I'd say it's high school level, so high school senior level. So it's not really that hard to understand. But yeah, it is presentation of studies and kind of combination of studies to present you the picture of how human beings work. Yeah, and I'd say this is the best book on psychology ever written. It doesn't get better than this. This is really the hard foundation of science, easy to understand, easy to read, and for someone who doesn't understand that much psychology or doesn't know really what psychology is or how the brain evolved or what the brain is, that person will be shocked by this book, by how great it is and how deep it is and how much science and introduction into various things it has. It's pretty much the forefront of psychology as a science. There's always a new version, try to get the newest version, but the old versions are really good too. And here we have, actually it's David Boss again. There's a lot of different personality psychology books, and this is a great textbook on their area. So textbooks are always great for introduction to our area. I have read different kind of textbooks from different kind of scientific fields, and I'd say that for personality psychology it means not social science, not social psychology, but personal, how people work individually, then this is the book to get. I've not read every of these textbooks on personality psychology, but David Boss is a really well-known scientist and very, very accepted scientist, and he still updates this book. And I really like it, and the science is great, the instructions are great, the level is really, really easy to understand. Yeah, I really can't see why you should read other textbooks beside this one. I mean, on this subject. At least not instead of it. It is one of my favorite books, but I think it does have some problems in how it presents the topics. For example, I really wish it didn't talk about Freud at all. It may be reference to Freud, reference to some of these other old psychology that we don't use today because it's not really scientific, it's just more philosophy. So it's okay to read about him, but it's really why. And I think that some chapters could be longer. For example, a lot of subjects are presented in a great way, and he does say what's right and what's wrong. But to really understand something, you have to read at least read about 30 studies supporting the claim. In this book, I feel more like he's using 5 or 10 studies to support a claim, and then he presents a new claim and then use 5 or 10 studies to support a claim. So, but if you want to understand psychology, this is of course intro book. This could be the first book you ever read about psychology. And of course, this is a must-read book for any kind of person doing any kind of thing in this world. Really a great book. Then we have biological psychology. This is a bit harder level than the other books. I have found great satisfaction in reading this, and it's always updated, of course. There are quite a few biological psychology books out there, different kind of textbooks, but I like this one, and it has colorful illustration. They have made some 3D illustrations to put in the book, and on every page you have colors and illustrations and photographs illustrating the point. As a book about biological psychology, it's really great, and it's really good, and it's worth the money. Trust me. They also have a great site where you can go in and check various illustrations and play various kind of guessing games and stuff like that. Also a really good site. But I do think it's a bit complicated book at time, because every chapter starts really easy and you kind of get into it and you're all excited about it, and at the end you have these hard complex illustrations of things and hard complex definitions and stuff like that. So actually the last few pages of every chapter are really hard to understand for every kind of layman. But still, it's a really good book, and even though it's hard to understand, and so what, you read it and then you forget, and then you read the next chapter. Still, I'd say it's a must-read book, because if you don't understand the biological concepts of how the brain works, then forget about psychology. Don't study it, don't read a few books, but if you really want to understand human beings, you have to understand how the brain works. And this is the foundation. And again, of course, this is the third book on my top 4 favorite books of all time. Steven Pinker, The Blank Slate. I think Steven Pinker, it's like he's a scientist, but he's also a philosopher. So in this book, he kind of mixes these two things, and it's not really about it's about concepts, but it's about concepts that really exist in the world. So, for example, how some people think that the brain is just a blank slate, that we are born without anything. Humans are just born with like kind of mushy brains in our head without anything in them. And then every stimuli we get develops our brain in a certain direction. This is, of course, it's not just wrong, it's the opposite of the truth. That's not how the brain works at all. But a lot of people believe that. I think most laymen think that the brain is a blank slate, and probably like 90% of academics believe that. And a lot of psychology is about blank slate and trying to write articles in the blank slate thinking. Still, if you do the real science, if you do scientific studies, you will soon realize that, okay, this concept of the brain is so wrong, and it's ridiculous, and it can't be used to explain any kind of thing. So I think this is a book that you can read if you want to understand how college works, how academia works, and how layman perception of psychology works. So it's not really about psychology as such, but it's about the biases you can have, and the biases of groups and religion and stuff like that can have about psychology, and misconceptions. It's really, really, really easy to misunderstand psychology. And I think that, all people in the world have some misconceptions about psychology and how one or the other thing works. So if you're interested in some political or biases in academia, then this is the book. And now that you have foundations for psychology, because you have the foundation now with all these books you have read, you actually understand psychology. But still, you can always dig deeper into several fields. And I think that now is the time to dig deeper into concepts and how we learn and how we work. And these are the concepts of leadership, concepts of how group works and how groupthink influences people. So if you want to become a leader or work in school settings or work with groups or stuff like that, then these are 3 must-read books, and really, really good books. Free to Learn, it's about how to create a good school, how children learn and how they thrive. Peter Gray says that the best way to learn is not being forced to learn, but being motivated to learn. So wanting to do something and then trying to achieve that and trying to learn how to do it. And it's a really, really good concept. Naturally Selected is about leadership. So it's about how natural leadership works. And natural leadership works like in bands, how it used to be 10,000 and 20,000 years ago, works in a really specific way. So all leaders used to be this way, and all kind of decisions used to come about this way, in groups where we discuss things or kind of try to influence what other people thought about certain subjects. And the power of positive deviance, it was a great surprise for me, because of course it also has great ratings as all the other books on my list, but I think this was a really surprise because, again, it was a thinking that I didn't have before about if you want to teach a new group something, then it's not always the best idea to just try to tell them what to do. You can kind of put them together and then ask them what they want to do and how they want to change, because a lot of the change is not about knowing what to do, it's about wanting it, and it's about striving for it and thinking that it's something you want to do. So this is what they do, and this is academia on the forefront, because they really explore a lot of kind of different kind of societies and different kind of countries, and they use the same technique about getting people together and asking them what they wanted to do and how they could solve these problems, and their solutions were always better than the solutions the scientists could come up with, because they are there, they know what to do, they know what they have. A really good book, and really easy to read, actually, super easy. And this is another book that really changed my life, and maybe not changed my life, but it's changed my perception of reality and my perception of life. It was one of those books that I couldn't imagine would have such a new idea for me, because when you read a lot, you've read about a lot of different ideas. So when you read about something really new and exciting, it's kind of weird, because you often read the same thing over and over and over and over again in all books. But this was a really, really good book and really creative book. Of course, she won the Nobel Prize in economics. Some call it not a Nobel's Prize, but yeah, I think it is. And it's Elinor Ostrom, I think she's called. Actually, I read it because it had the word evolution on the front page. So I thought, hey, a book about something evolution and society, that's exactly what I want to read about. So yeah, I read it, and it was of course not about evolution, it was about evolution of institutions and how institutions work, and how the government doesn't need to always be there to control things, that actually people can come to an agreement. So if you have a small city, or if you have a small tribe or something like that, or a group of people that kind of uses some resources, they can come to an agreement on how to use those resources so they will last a lifetime and even more. So the government doesn't have to go up to them and tell them, okay, don't use too much oil because we won't have oil tomorrow, or don't overuse the trees, don't overfish. So if you have small groups where everyone can talk together, they can often come to a great agreement on how to really live in the world and live in nature, so that it will last forever. And of course, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you have some complications. So when people try to come to an agreement and let's say the government tries to intervene, the government can easily ruin it, because if the government says you can do this and this, then people will just try to do that instead of following their own group agreements. So yeah, it's definitely a must-read book. It is a bit high level, and it does have a lot of numbers on some pages. So actually, it has like sometimes it has like 5 pages in a row just with numbers and description of things, and it's really fascinating, and it's kind of nerdy. But yeah, I liked it because it's a unique for a book like this. It's science on a high level. It's philosophy on a high level. It's sociology on a high level. And it's highly recommended for people who want to read a little bit more complicated stuff than the basic books they're reading. And this is actually a super easy book to read. I was kind of thinking about which books I would use if I had to start from fresh with like a sixth grade level in school. If I had to teach them about society and psychology and how the mind works and people and group works, then this would actually be a great introduction. It is economics, so this is why it's not the first book I recommend for psychology, but it is really important to understand how macroeconomics works, because how people influence economics in microeconomics, that influences macroeconomics, and that again influences the individuals in the society. So you really cannot look at the human being and then just ignore everything that's going on in the society. And to understand even a little bit of the society you live in, you have to understand macroeconomics. You just have to. It's a foundation for everything that goes on around us. So yeah, highly recommended. Really easy to read for layman and whatever, and even for experts, it will be a exciting read. This is of course a classic in psychology. So yeah, if you read psychology, you know this book, and you know how much it is appreciated in by everyone. Psychology professors love this book. Laymen love this book. Everyone likes it because it's such an interesting read. It's fascinating. It's really good and groundbreaking science, but it's also very well written. Everything is so simple. Everything is explained so well. I wouldn't say that he explains everything from any kind of foundation, like from evolutionary perspective or like comparative psychology or stuff like that. He does explain how humans work, but not why or how it came to be, or how we work in as like small bands, or how we used to be 10,000 years ago. So it's not the first book I would recommend for really getting a deeper look into psychology. But even if you hate psychology, this is of course a must-read book. So this is an interesting book because one problem some people have with psychology and the science of psychology is that applied psychology is not illustrated that much in scientific books and papers. So, for example, the last book, Influence, it was about applied psychology and how you can think about psychology and how you can sell stuff and not be tricked by sellers. And this book again has the topics about how you can apply the science that you have learned about, and it's really fascinating because you read about real life examples, and then these examples are explained with the scientific studies that we have on the area. So I highly recommend it. And another thing to keep in mind is to select the books you read, because some books are really interesting and they're also about psychology, but they're not that scientific. So try to select books that are scientific. So they usually have words in them like biology or neuroscience or evolution. Then it's probably not terrible science. The Female Brain, it's again a book recommended by both professors in various subjects and the layman. So it's again this kind of weird book that's not it's not just study after study after study after study, and it's not the dry explanation of things or numbers. It's more illustration of how things works, and there's a lot of good studies in this book and a lot of really good explanations. So I can definitely see why a lot of scientists recommend this book too. And I'd say, yeah, on the female brain, this is on the female behavior, this is one of the best intro books on the subject. It's not really a deep look into the science. Then you probably need to read Evolutionary Psychology by David Buss to get the deeper look into the science and different studies and how we came to understand everything. This is more like an explanation for the layman. And God Species. Okay, this is not really psychology as such. Actually, a lot of good books I read, like on economics and society and religion, they are not about psychology. But you need to understand religion to understand psychology. So these people who write these kind of geopolitical books, economic books, they understand how stuff works, but they don't understand why it is so. They don't understand the brain and why people think this way. But you still need to understand these things to understand the psychology of the individual. And God Species will tell you about how nature works, how we use it, and how we use resources in this and that place. So this is more about how we live in the world and how the future will be, and why we do as we do in the world on a grand scale. And then, of course, I could recommend probably 50 other great books on psychology. I have read quite a lot of books, also articles, and watched all the documentaries I can watch on psychology. Everything I can get my hands on. Also movies and music and whatnot, discussions online. But for the foundation, for getting the basics, getting really the basic understanding so that you can discuss psychology online and people won't call you stupid, you need to read these books I have recommended. You need to read them all, and you need to read them and understand them. That's my opinion on the subject, because if you don't understand some of this that I have talked about, if you don't understand some of the topics these books have talked about, you really need to study it more, because this is, for me, this is a foundation for academia in psychology. I wouldn't say it's a PhD level discussion or something like that, but if you understand all of this, you can have a discussion with a professor in psychology, and he will find you intelligent, and he will not find great holes in your knowledge about psychology, and you can even illustrate some things to him that he doesn't know about. So these books are the foundation. And to understand how we can use psychology and how it is used, I think you need to read about how groups work and what people do in real life. And Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's a really good introduction into how group works and how you can build a good group and what can go wrong and what can go the right way. It's of course a classic in literature, and it's the book that the movie Lincoln was made on. She's also a really famous historical writer, probably one of the most famous historical writers today. So highly recommended, yeah, about groups. And Over the Edge of the World, it's Lawrence Bergreen. This is a masterpiece, really. It's a really easy read and it's really exciting. It's not as long as the Team of Rivals, so that's also a good thing. And it's about Magellan and how he traveled the world and how he saw the world through religion, because he was Christian. And how the people he met understood him and how he understood the people. There's a great... He went around the world and he came to an island chain where people started to take the merchandise of the ship, and he kind of thought they stole it. But in reality, a lot of these bands and a lot of these tribes, they have a sharing culture or not owning culture. So if you take something, it belongs to you. And if someone has a lot and you can take something up from him, then it's how stuff is supposed to be. So it's not communistic as such, but it is always use what you have around you. And if someone has too much, then he clearly doesn't need it. And Magellan, he started shooting on these people because he thought they were robbing him, and they were. They know they were stealing from him, but to them it felt like it was part of the culture and society. So this is kind of the complications that can arrive if you don't understand psychology. So yeah, this was actually the last two books on the list. This will give you the foundation to understand the basics in psychology. I think maybe I didn't have any books on IQ, on G factor and stuff like that. You probably need to read into that too. So there's a lot of subjects that's not covered by these books, but just one of the books, personality psychology, will be enough to cover all the basics of all the basics I have talked about. So you won't get a deep understanding into how intelligence works, but you will understand the basics. So yeah, if you read all this and you discuss psychology online, you won't feel stupid ever discussing psychology. Thanks.